You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY and Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. All right, before I proceed to take the next 20 minutes and probably get a bunch of people upset with some of the things that I'm going to say, I think it's important for me to let you guys know that I do have access to the video of the speech I gave to the 7th Congressional Democrats. It's currently available on my Ben Comino's YouTube page. I shared it to my Facebook account. If you're not already subscribed to me on YouTube, it's available on Facebook as well. It will redirect you to my YouTube page. And once arriving there, please consider subscribing. All the cool people are doing it. It's fine if you don't. But I guess that just means you're probably not that cool. But the video looks great. It sounds great, and it gives you some insight here. And hopefully, if we're lucky, the Wisconsin Dems might take a thing or two that I said over the course of that 30 minutes or so that I was speaking and kind of run some of that stuff up the flagpole here. Because as we're going to be highlighting throughout the show today, there's going to be a little bit of emphasis here later on in the program. We're going to be smack dab in the middle of the Fox Valley to start off. But there's going to be some conversation about economic turmoil, belief in where the economy is going, and then a reflection of where the economy has been for the last 7 years, and some pretty damning statistics surrounding that information that I think are going to be pretty difficult to avoid long term. But first, and so please do check that out. It'll be available in perpetuity. It's up there right now on the Ben Commoner's YouTube page. Subscribe, help a brother out. Every one of those actually makes my life a whole hell of a lot easier. Now, on to the story of the day, and we're going to focus hyper-local today. I briefly touched on this story because I did not have all the information, and now feels like a good a time as any to jump into this conversation, does it not? A lot of people commenting on my shirt, by the way. Thank you very much on YouTube and TikTok. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I actually have two of them, so I wear it more often than you would think. It's purple and it's got a rainbow colored yin yang symbol, which I just said rainbow colored, and now immediately 40% of my audience just turned to, what is that, a trans shirt? And then that's the end of that conversation right there. It's just time to move on. But we're going to start with the Kaukauna School District. If you're not listening to me in the Fox Valley, this might be new information to you, although it seems to be getting quite a bit of legs here on the national scene, because if there's one thing the MAGA movement is good at, it is crying when their fifis are hurt. Very famously, after the shooting of Renee Good, there was a pretty concerted effort to get Outside the Box off the air because I had the audacity to post a video where I proclaimed F-ICE without censoring a handful of times and talked about exactly how I felt about that organization and the way that they were treating American citizens. It's crazy how organized these people can be when they want to try and cancel something. Unfortunately, if you're going to take your shot at the king, you better not miss. But in any event, at Kaukauna, it's a little bit of a different story here. If you are unfamiliar, if you've been living under a rock with your eyes shut and your fingers in your ears, there is one individual placed on administrative leave. He is a high school teacher, Patrick Meyer. He has been placed on administrative leave, and I'm operating right off of the WHBY website. We just have the bare bones of the story available there. It all is about the aftermath of the White House Correspondents' Dinner shooting. Now, as I stated yesterday, and as I will state again today, I have aged out of edgelord humor. I don't understand why people think that that is a reasonable way to interact. And as I mentioned with Aisha Morales during the local half hour, it might just be something that media people are taught. Like, I even get to know somebody who works with me personally, and they will tell you that I make them uncomfortable because I drop F-bombs left, right, and center while standing in front of the microphone. And they're like, aren't you nervous? You forgot to turn the microphone off. Rule number one of media is the mic's always hot. You can't be talking that way. And I'm like, nah, I'm in front of the boards. Don't worry. I'm not saying anything wrong. Nothing bad's going to happen. But I, too, know that as a public-facing figure, everything you say faces the public, and there's going to be an outcome from that. If you are not a public-facing figure, that almost goes tenfold for you, because I can say something outlandish, right? I can say, TikTok shouldn't have, the Chinese owners of TikTok shouldn't have had to sell to Larry Ellison in America, because I am not intimidated by whether or not China's government has my info or America's government has my info. And some people, that makes their blood boil. But because I'm a public facing figure, I could take the next 2 hours and describe exactly why I feel that way, kind of set the record straight. And if anybody's still mad, well, it's a difference of opinion, and we're just going to have to go our separate directions. If you're not somebody who faces the public on a day-to-day basis, and the only thing that we have to go on is a tweet or a post or a whatever that's being made available to the public, well, that's a bit of a different scenario entirely. And to that effect, Patrick Meyer said, I am not impressed with the presidential assassins. And then he goes on to say, as it struggles to load, it's bleeping embarrassing. Booth, Gateau, I always forget how to pronounce this guy's name, Coolgosh, and and Oswald must be spinning in their graves. MAGA, but with an extra A, make Americans great assassins again. Sad. Now, I talked about this briefly yesterday, and I even saw one individual tell me, oh, no, this was satire. And like, I'm just going to be real with you, that this is not the definition of satire. I realize putting sad at the end of it implies that you're trying to talk like how Donald Trump talks. I understand the joke. I get it. For the record, I get it. And more importantly, I'm not offended because I'm not a baby. I think a lot of people are looking to get their fifis hurt, because when they do get hurt, you're able to get loud and people pay attention to you a little bit more. There's a bit of a split attitude on this, though, and I do see why, because I'll just be frank with you. I am not a parent. I do not have children in any, at least as far as I know, in any school district. If I did have a child that had this teacher as a teacher, I would not be put out by this, because I was raised in a family where people kind of spoke their mind. I was raised in a family where, don't get me wrong, I had very strict parents, but we were kind of allowed to talk. However, it's how you become a successful talk show host, is you kind of grow up in that kind of household. Had I been spanked or reined into what I was speaking, I might not have all of these awesome opinions that I have today. All of that being said, I get why there's other people that would not want their children to be taught by this guy. I do get it. I'm not chastising you for feeling that way. But what I do want to say is this. If you voted for Trump multiple times and this is what offends you, shut up, right? Shut the hell up. Like, you obviously don't care about verbiage. You just care when the verbiage is aimed at stuff that you disagree with. I've oftentimes highlighted the fact that the make comedy legal again crowd, the man, I'm just making jokes, why are the woke liberals so anti-jokes? The second the joke becomes about white people or religion or Republican politicians, all of a sudden those people that say make comedy legal again really don't want comedy to be legal anymore. It's uncanny how often that is the situation. As I've stated 1,000 times over, I feel like we have to have this conversation once every 90 days. I will never advocate to cancel anybody for nonviolent actions, because I know what I do for a living. The fact that I have not said something that got me fired yet actually has a lot of people that know me on a personal level kind of impressed at how well I've been able to keep it in check. There is a race to get these people fired. And by these people, I mean anybody who speaks out in this way. As I highlighted yesterday, in Milwaukee, there is a guy who has my job that advocated for Iran to assassinate the governor of Minnesota. He still is not only working, but has had his reach amplified since making that proclamation. Nobody's still sitting there wondering, how can anybody advertise with this guy? How is this guy still on the air? Everybody's just kind of moved on. And the same thing will happen here. It's what you start to learn about cancel culture. It's not about being offended. It's about giving people who don't have a whole lot going on in their lives something to do. until until it's over, and then they just move on to the next thing. If this teacher were to end up getting fired, Patrick Meyer, all the people that are completely taken aback by what he said would forget his name within 48 hours. Doesn't change what he said. What he said is wrong, and teachers shouldn't be talking that way. But to end an entire livelihood over a tweet where he very clearly is parroting, well, not parroting, mimicking a Trump-style tweet, and definitely got out of hand, I think we're going a bit too far. I think we're taking this far too far in society today. And I recognize 10 years ago, before I had a job or even worked in media, it was egregious, and the left were the loudest bunch of babies you could possibly stand to stomach. And I was saying in my personal life the exact same thing then that I'm saying now. And it turns out that Republicans weren't upset that liberals were soft and making comments about cancel culture. They were just mad that they weren't the ones that had the opportunity to do it. And I think we need somebody to stand up and say, let's pivot from this. Let's move on from what is happening right now, because this ain't going to cut it going forward. There's a lot of students that are speaking out about Patrick Meyer, and I have not personally reached out to have him on the show, but people with much more clout than I have been reaching out and have not gotten an answer yet. I don't blame him for not wanting to go on. To be perfectly frank, most people who do what I do are vultures, and I probably wouldn't trust me either unless I knew me. So I don't hold any grudges against that kind of attitude, because I'm sure there's a bunch of people with ill intent reaching out, trying to make this guy look like a jerk. But as Aisha covered, and there's a much more in-depth story on the WBAY.com website, a lot of students are happy with this guy as a teacher. A lot of parents are happy with this guy and how he interacts with their students. And the only people who are upset are the people that are upset with the comments that are being made here. I don't know. This is a sticky one. I've been thinking about this for 24 hours, and I still, honest to God, don't know if I have the words, because I sometimes think, and had he come out and posted a tweet, but if instead of it being about Donald Trump and assassinations, had he come out and said something about the special needs community, I think I'd probably be a lot more livid. I've been a lot more livid about stuff that was said, and I myself have to look inward and try and determine why it is that I clearly get upset at certain things and not others, and work on that in my own personal life. Obviously, I'm making a reference to what's his name, the anti-autistic Avenger who used to work at WISN, who no longer works there now, of course, but he didn't get fired for that specifically. But anyone who was listening to the program at that time knows that at no point was I ever calling for his job, despite the fact that I was livid at what he had to say about Tim Walz's autistic son. Patrick Myers seems like he's someone who takes the job seriously, and more importantly, someone who takes the job seriously in an industry where we do not have the luxury of shooing away people that know how to do the job well, because of one comment that was made. And I get it. Political violence is never the answer, and people are going to make jokes. But I have to say, if you are an advocate for this guy getting fired, I better never hear an ounce of support for Trump coming out of your mouth, and I better never hear you laughing about the trans community or the George Floyd murders or any of the other litany of jokes that are perpetually made from the other side of the aisle that just seem to go by the wayside as people say, what, you allergic to good humor? Like, eventually we're going to have to come to grips with it. Consistency is king in life, and if we want to live in a society, we're going and tweeting one thing at 9:18 in the morning and getting seen by 1,600 people is going to be the end of somebody's career or not. I think that's an interesting conversation to be had. As of right now, he's currently placed on administrative leave. Only time will tell what's going to ultimately end up coming from here, but something tells me it's only going to get a lot louder as time goes on. We've got some text messages. Hello to everybody in the TikTok and YouTube chats, by the way. I see you guys firing and away here. Thank you for being here. Jesse says, Ben, when are you going to run for office? You're not the first person to ask me that even this week. Um, not yet. Not yet. That's all I have to say. DSL says, I think the most concerning thing is that if these teachers are so emboldened to say dumb things publicly and to strangers, what are they saying to our children? That's a fair point in a more secluded setting. If he weren't a teacher, I really wouldn't care. And that's a fair point. There's no right answers here, DSL. And I think that's a very fair assessment. And you, in terms of most people who regularly interact with this show, are fairly consistent in your logic, which is, again, all I can ask for. And I know you'd be operating the same way, regardless of which direction the comment had been made. I always say I think it's part of why I speak the way that I do. My dad to this day still makes fun of me because most children like kind of avoid their parents. They don't talk to them about what happened in school. And every day when I would come home from school, I'd throw my book bag on the ground and I'd stand in front of the TV that my parents were watching so they'd have to look at me while I was talking. And then I would just relay everything that happened over the course of that 8 hours. And I did it every day. And so had a teacher said something that was a little untoward or whatever, they probably would have been aware. But I recognize that not everybody has that kind of time anymore, A, or B, that kind of relationship with their children and parents where you kind of relay those messages to your parents that way. So I get your comment there. Connie says the teacher showed poor judgment. If everyone who showed poor judgment got fired, nobody would have a job, and the current president would be the former president. Well, that's the real kicker, is that we're holding a teacher to a higher standard than we are holding the president of the United States. And I think it's kind of hard to avoid that reality. That far worse has been said. Violent rhetoric is espoused by this president towards his political enemies and the left in general regularly. And pretending that you didn't that one of those is okay, or feeling like you have more control over one because a teacher obviously doesn't have the same kind of power that a president has. It's hard to tell. We have Steve in my TikTok chat saying it's a question of judgment too. He's entrusted with teaching children, teaching and nurturing children, 100%. And like, to me, it becomes a matter of, you can think it, you can say it in your social circles, even if it were a joke that had been made in a group chat privately that had been leaked. I think it would have been different. It's the fact that someone took the time to put this out in a public sphere. Like, for sake of argument, I think I've used this example before on my show, but I worked with a woman back in Pittsburgh who had a very prominent right-wing host. In terms of ratings, everybody on the station was basically at zeros, and she would blow the roof off of the ratings. She did well every single week. She, at one point, took to Facebook Live. She was operating on her personal time. It was 9 p.m. I don't have any evidence of this, but she may have been a little tuned up. I doubt this person was, because it was 9:18 in the morning. Who knows? It's Wisconsin. I'm not judging. But this person back in Pittsburgh, it was 9 o'clock in the evening, clearly a little tuned up on her porch, and she was advocating for anybody. This was back in the era of statues, because the Republican Party just has a culture war issue nonstop. This was in the era of Confederate statues and whether or not they should still be erected or be defaced or not. And she went on Facebook Live and said, I think that everybody who's trying to deface a Confederate statue should be sniped. And she said, let's see how many of these criminals will continue acting this way once they see a couple of their friends, getting taken out. She remained suspended for 2 weeks. I was working in the newsroom at the time, and the phone didn't stop ringing for 2 weeks with people trying to get angry. And what's interesting is I remember her producer, who is still a friend of mine today. I remember her producer saying, this is an AstroTurfed effort to get her canceled. The same people are calling over and over again because there's so many liberals and so many leftists that hate this woman that this is a concentrated campaign to get her off the air. And I'd be sitting there. I was maybe 30 at that point, just over 30. And I was like, bro, you can't say that kind of stuff and then expect nothing to happen. I don't think you need to AstroTurf an effort to get somebody fired after you go and say something like that. And I can safely say 6 or 7 years since that's happened, that there absolutely is an astroturfed effort to get people fired after they say stuff like this. I guarantee you some of the loudest voices in this story are not coming from the Fox Valley. And I know it because I watched it happen to me with complete strangers tagging my radio station, talking to my superiors who acted like they had been following my show forever, showed up, tried to get the show off the air, and have not appeared on my feed since the bustle died down from the posts that I had made. And then you begin to realize, oh, son of a gun, these guys really do move in this kind of effort. Doesn't take away from the fact that I turned on my microphone and said, F ICE. They're a masked virgin Gestapo, and the best they should hope for is to be defunded to zero. It doesn't change the fact that my former colleagues said that people defacing Confederate statues should be sniped. And it doesn't change the fact that this teacher, Patrick Meyer, said that we need to make assassins great again because this is the third time there's been a failed assassination attempt, allegedly, on Donald Trump. I'm joking. Don't try and get me fired. There comes a time when I think we just need to learn to move on. And a lot of points are getting made to the contrary. Teachers do carry with them a certain extra level of trust and expectation that I think are not bestowed on a lot of other people. And of course, those same people that have this trust and expectation should never expect to get a raise or have adequate working conditions, because we don't respect you that much. We just want you, saying the things we want you to say. But you'll just never hear me turn my microphone on and say that somebody, as Ali highlights, how dare you make a joke. You'll never hear me turn my microphone on and say somebody should be canceled because they made a joke. That's not going to be the world that I want to live in, and I feel like we all kind of agree. I'm going to go to break. My YouTube chat popped off a little bit, so I'd like to see a little bit about what they have to say about this as well, and I'll get some more comments in, and I welcome anybody else who wants to chime in. Clearly, our HBY Facebook page is generating a whole hell of a lot more traffic than it normally does as a result of this story, and I welcome anybody. As I see we have a call, I'll probably do this before I go to commercial, because I'm very easy to be talked out of going to commercial. Yeah, let's just do it. But anybody else who wants to share their thoughts, I'm open to that as well, because clearly a lot of people feel a certain way. I promise I won't waka you on your way out. Let's have a real conversation about this. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Morning, Ben. I just wanted to thank you. The other day I mentioned pitchforks in a discussion, and you talked it back. I had no intention of violence, with that
Absolutely.
example. I was just talking more like gusto and whatever. Yeah. I was in the business. I had a news anchor that got fired at one of my stations because we didn't catch. I wasn't at the controls or anything, but we had an open mic and she had some swear words or something, and she did get fired. But that's part of maintaining, like this teacher maybe, and you and I in the biz. You got to maintain a professional attitude while you're at work, because we've had stuff we got loose with behind the scenes of just joking around, and next thing you know, the number one rule, always think that you have an open mic. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. You know it as well as I do. The mic is always hot. That's rule number one. That's the first thing that somebody said to me. Rule number one when I was a producer is the mic is always hot. Rule number two is there's the dump button if the mic is hot and you say something you shouldn't be saying. And I mean, it's a principle that's beat into us here. And I appreciate the call and attitude there, Dave. I love where he's coming from with that. And again, it's a different career. It's a different career path, and I don't think people should lose their livelihoods for one moment of a lack of focus there. But it's definitely hard to deal with. Rick in Appleton says, what about when Nancy Pelosi's husband was hit in the head with a hammer and some of the people in office were making jokes about him? What a Halloween party where they had costumes of people hit in the head with hammers. Higher standards should be to all, especially those in public office. 1,000%. And that's kind of where this argument kind of falls flat. But I also understand that a lot of the people doing that, it's kind of hard. It's like when I say we need to make sure that the corruption in the military industrial complex is handled because that's hundreds of billions of dollars. But those numbers feel so high and the Defense Department feels so out of reach that people almost just refuse to coalesce around that message. But then when a local charity receiving tax dollars receives $50,000 that it uses fraudulently, obviously still bad, and obviously something that should be rooted out of the system, that feels a little bit more attainable. That feels like, oh, I can complain until that stops. There's nothing I can do about defense spending. And I feel like that's what we're running into here with this teacher versus the entire Trump administration's attitudes and the way they carry themselves and the way that they talk about stuff. The president of the United States, less than 2 months ago, put out a tweet saying he was going to end an entire civilization. And the same people that are clapping for that are the same people that are asking for this person to be fired for his tweet. And there's a lack of consistency that I think is fairly obvious if you're willing to look at it that way. I have Ethan and plenty of YouTube chats as well, but we've been talking for like 25 minutes. I will keep this conversation rolling on the other side. We'll be back in a couple minutes. You're listening to Outside the Box here on WHBY. You know what's better than Googling a plumber and hoping for the best? Checking the reviews and seeing your neighbors already trust and love them. Roush Plumbing has the Google reviews to back it up. Fox Valley homeowners are raving about the fast, friendly, reliable service. And here's something you don't see every day: a free text line to a real plumber. Got a question before you schedule? Text it. Sometimes that's all you need. And with spring rains coming, don't wait to make sure that your sump pump is ready. Call or text Roush Plumbing, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. You can find that free text line and plenty of more info at timroushplumbing.com. All right. Jaro Manny says, I have a child that recently graduated from high school. One, I was never associated with their current teachers on any social media. I don't want to know what they are posting, and I don't want them to know what I am posting. Two, if I did hear something like this from one of my child's teachers, I would not be offended, no matter what side of the aisle the teacher was speaking of. But I have to ask Jarmani, so like, just for sake of argument, and I absolutely respect your opinion there, and I do believe that you say that, but at the same time, if a teacher took to social media to demonize the transgender community and say some genuinely awful things about that population and why, and then, fill it in with something about locker rooms or pronouns or whatever the hell the conversation is, would you be sitting there saying, oh, well, it's freedom of speech and they're allowed to say what they want to say? Or would you be saying these students need to feel safe around this person, and the way that they are talking is not indicative of the way that somebody should be speaking that's accepting of all students? Like, and like, for the record, I'd probably be right there with you. Like, that's what I'm saying is I think we need to come to grips with the fact that we all have trigger points. The idea that one side or the other is a big snowflake while the other ones are there trying to restore freedom of speech, I think is a laughable assertion. I think we all have our own version of snowflakiness in us. Some of it reacts differently than others to it. And it's a matter of finding a way to channel that feeling and react in a way that doesn't completely upend other people's lives because something that they said bothered us. If they engage in actions, totally different conversation. But I do get your point, though. And I see I have a call, and we'll get you on in a second here. Just to be clear, to date myself a little bit, I did not go to high school. Like, MySpace was a thing, but teachers weren't on MySpace. When I was on Facebook, you needed an EDU email address to use Facebook. There were no parents or grandparents or teachers that weren't in college on Facebook. It was just college students. MySpace was just young people and maybe a handful of creepers we didn't realize at the time, because everything sucks. The older you get, you realize everything sucks. You're just oblivious to it at different times. But the fact is, it's a different era that I can't even begin to relate to. And so I recognize that. I am trying to do this conversation to the best of my ability, not necessarily having all of the pieces necessary to really have an informed opinion. But what I do know is I grew up in a house where you were basically allowed to say whatever you wanted. So in terms of just words, it's going to be very difficult for me to say that person's career should be over because of words that were said. Hell, I'm not even going to open that can of worms. See, that's the live radio discretion that you learn doing this job full time. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Good morning, Ben. It's Betsy. And I, like you, have spent probably too much time thinking about this and trying to be consistent about it. And I've come up with the criteria that our judicial system apparently uses to decide whether something like that post crosses the line. And it appears to be that it's the propensity to which those words incite actual violence, right? So, for example, President Trump was found not guilty of inciting violence on January 6th.
Sure.
He's found not guilty of inciting violence when he talks about being happy that people are dead or wiping out entire civilizations. So apparently, we're found not guilty when we don't have the propensity to incite actual violence. And the other criteria I think here that's important is that the teacher was taking aim, no pun intended, at a public figure, right? And I think public figures are held to a different standard in terms of, slander, in terms of making fun of them, et cetera, which is why Jimmy Kimmel can get away with the jokes he makes, because he's a comedian and he's poking fun at public figures. Had Mr. Meyer made a similar joke about the local principal or a fellow teacher, I think that would have been totally different.
Different
there
in
would have
which
been
way?
more propensity. There would have been, well, A, it wouldn't have been a public figure that should not expect some level of privacy, and B, there would have been more of a propensity for students to think, oh yeah, Mr. ABC is a jerk because Mr. Meyer thinks so I think I should hurt him too. So it's not an easy thing. It was bad. It was definitely bad judgment. No doubt. It was bad judgment. I don't think a career should be lost because of it, but I think certain criteria need to be weighed every time. Like, back to the point about consistency, we need to come up with, well, what are the criteria here for whether somebody should lose a job in a public service role? There currently are no criteria, and there probably need to be some.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think there is an obvious lack of consistency, and we should probably hammer it out, especially within industry. And I really don't have anything else to add to what you said. Other than that, I think it's spot on. It's a very hairy situation, and at the end of the day, you just kind of wish he didn't make the joke. But unfortunately,
exactly.
Here we are.
Bad judgment, maybe. Yeah, bad judgment, and maybe like other instances, maybe he needs to go through some training. There needs to be some consequence, no doubt. There needs to be some consequence. There needs to be something that will prevent him from making the same bad in the future. I don't know what that looks like, but it can't go without consequence. But I don't think the consequence needs to be firing. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I appreciate the call, Betsy. You take it easy. I think she's spot on with her assessment there. And I mean, I don't even know if I've talked about this on the air or not, but the day Henry Kissinger died, I think my career flashed before my eyes. I had a segment planned that was not going to be particularly flattering because I don't believe Henry Kissinger lived a particularly flattering life. And one coworker of mine who rarely even interacted with me, he's no longer with the company anymore, heard me relaying the segment that I had planned. And he said, Ben, I have far too much respect for you and what you do and the way you talk about things to hear that that's the way you're going to talk about somebody on the day that they passed. And I hope that you'll reconsider. And for that person to kind of talk to me in that way, I'm not even joking, 5 minutes before I was about to go on the air and do exactly what I was intending to do. I have no idea if I'd be talking to you guys here today had there not been that one person to kind of like essentially take me by the hand and be like, dude, this isn't the way. Like, you can talk about this person. You can relay your frustration with who this person was while they lived without being a jerk. Let's be real. If the president were to pass, either in office or after his term is over, and I have to talk about him, that's going to be a strange episode of this show, right? Because I think he's awful for this country. I think every single thing that we talk about on this program, whether it be socially, economically, everything outside of Mexicans crossing the border is objectively worse now than it was 3 years ago. And I think that's by design. I think this man is uniquely corrupt, and I think he's got a huge I think he's doing horrible damage to his legacy by anybody who's not in the cult. When he dies, I'm not going to do some kind of celebratory thing like what Minocqua Brewing Company's doing, like what you're seeing this post kind of celebrating. Because to be frank, and I'm not saying if it would change things, I would all of a sudden start advocating for it. But were that individual to be successful on Saturday, all that happens is J.D. Vance is now president, and we're basically in the exact same boat we're in right now. As I often highlight, there's something that liberals do where they act like Donald Trump is somehow unique to what the situation is. I hate to break it to you, but Nikki Haley would most certainly be bombing Iran and would most certainly be cutting taxes for billionaires. Like, would there be a masked Virgin Army murdering Americans in the streets? Maybe. I don't know. But like, a lot of what's taking place in this Trump administration would be taking place regardless of which Republican won. It's not a matter of Donald Trump being some kind of unique force. It's a matter of acknowledging that the economic principles espoused by mainstream Republicans these days really don't have a lot of basis in reality in terms of how effective they are for the working class. Ethan out in Appleton says, I have similar concerns as DSL. but I've personally had different experience. I think generally teachers keep things more buttoned up in front of the kids than they would be online outside the classroom. Not all, but most. I've had quite a few teachers I have had high praise for as teachers that I found out later have some rough beliefs. The only teacher I ever really knew their personal political beliefs was the government politics teacher, which, makes sense. And I hear that as well. I was thinking back on this while everybody's talking, and to be perfectly frank with you, I don't know that I knew most of my teachers' political leanings. We're in a different America now, though. Like I say with professional athletes, it's not that professional athletes in 2026 are somehow worse people than the professional athletes in 1976. The difference is we have cameras and social media, so we know what they're doing all the time now. It's just in the 70s, they were probably doing worse stuff because it was just different societally. But we didn't know that it was happening. And even if people did know it was happening, they turned a blind eye. And this kind of feels like that situation, but again, on a tiny, tiny scale. We've got another call in here, and the texts and YouTube messages are piling up. So we'll keep it rolling as best we can here. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Good morning, Ben.
How are you?
Good. I just think this is interesting. Trump is just at a roast for a First Amendment event, and we're again speaking about this. The teacher in Kaukauna, that was his own personal account, social media. He was not speaking. I would not take it as he's speaking for the school or the district. He's not using his employer's information. He's posting his beliefs. If there is harm proven, someone could file suit against him. I mean, I think you should be able to say what you want about me. If I can prove damages, I guess I'll see you in court. Short of that,
let me tell you this, because I agree with the point that you're making here. I think everything you're saying is on point. Here's the thing. If you tried to say that about the Ben Comino's personal page to my employers, they'd say, you're a WHBY talk show host. It's labeled on your social page that you are a representative of the station, and even on your personal page, what you have to say is a reflection of the people that employ you. And for the record, I agree with you. I'm 100% on board with that's the way it should work. But businesses aren't going to look at it through that same lens, and I have to believe schools won't either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I expect, like right now, you are intertwined with WHBY. But if I were to go on a site tonight that you're writing, I would take it as it's Ben's personal beliefs, not necessarily, unless if he ties the radio station into it. But I guess getting back to what Betsy said, I guess I'm a little bit leery about rational people being able to prove or disprove whether I incited riots or violence. That's a really tough issue. And then whether I should be held accountable for that. I don't really even know what that would look like.
I'm right there with you. And I mean, unfortunately, we're pressing up against it, and I have to end the call there. And you've opened an entire can of worms that I think is diving into, because again, it's like proving insider trading. Like, prove that I knew what was going to happen. That's a high burden of proof. And this is the same kind of idea here. But I'm right there with you. I'll tell you guys what, we still have Ethan, Lenny, Tina, and a new caller, as well as plenty of YouTube comments as well. I have to squeeze another break in here, but we'll jump into it. A little bit of a longer break in here. I messed up the timing a little bit. That's on me. But everybody stay right where you are, and we will continue this conversation. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Comnos here on WHBY. Hey guys, Ben here. I want to tell you about my experience with Valley Eye Associates. As you all know, I got LASIK back in December. It's almost May, and I am still not used to the compliments that I am getting. And what's funny is that people, when they meet me for the first time, because they only see pictures of me with my glasses, they say, "You look so different." I can't put my finger on what changed. And it's the fact that I no longer have my spectacles to help me correct my vision, and that is only doable because of the help that I got with Valley Eye Associates. Look, if you're doing it for aesthetics, if you're doing it for eye health, if you're doing it just to improve your vision in general, be able to see on the roads clearer, go to theaters and enjoy the shows better, whatever the situation is, Valley Eye can help you along on your eyesight journey. And the best part is, they offer a free consultation to let you know what you're qualified for, what you're not qualified for, and what kind of expenses you may need in order to get it done. The only way to find out, though, is to go and set up that free consultation. So head to valleyeye.com. That's VALLEYEYE.com and set up that appointment today and see what you're qualified for. I promise you, you will not regret it. We've got a lot more coming up. The only way to find out what it is stay tuned outside the box. Do we know, is this just the burger patty, or is it with a whole mess of crap on it as well?
It's not crap.
Stuff. This was a whole mess of stuff on it as well, because that matters, right? Because if they're baking their burgers in whiskey or whatever, like that sounds appealing, you know. And like I'd be like, yeah, so I'm interested. Or is it just the best Wagyu beef? That's an entirely different scenario here.
There's a lot that goes into it, from the beef to the bun to everything else.
Yeah, well, just give me the patty on a plate, and I'll tell you what the real best burger in Wisconsin is here. All right, here's Hooper. All right, we're back. Ben Cominos, WHPY Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company the Fox Valley depends on. If you're just joining us, we spent an entire hour talking about the situation at Kaukauna High School and how frustrated some people in the Fox Valley are with one teacher's comments about the shooting attempt at the White House Correspondents' Dinner as he's been put on administrative leave. I guess I should do the thing that most lesser than talk shows do and actually recap some of the info. Patrick Meyer of Kaukauna Area School District put out a tweet on the 26th, on Sunday morning at 9:18 a.m. I am not impressed with recent presidential assassins. It's effing embarrassing. Booth, Gateau, then the name I never can remember. Jonathan even sent me the pronunciation, but I'm not going to take the time to go back. Chitgul, right? I think is how you say it. And Oswald must all be spinning in their graves. MAGA, make Americans great assassins again. Sad. Some people, including Sterline in my YouTube chat, saying he kind of reads into that as satire or as a joke. I can definitely understand why people are looking at that through a different lens as well. I struggle with the prospect of firing anybody over a tweet or something that they said that is not actually instilling any violence. The reason I'm laughing is because I was telling my own personal story about how I was about to go off on Henry Kissinger after his passing and was kind of talked off the ledge by a random coworker of mine who just happened to be walking by when I was kind of describing what the segment was going to look like. And he was like, Ben, I have too much respect for you. You shouldn't be reacting that way when somebody dies. And thankfully, I listened to that because for all we know, you guys might not be hearing me. And Ethan in Appleton said, I'd love to hear that Henry Kissinger segment someday. And I said, I might make it a TikTok live exclusive, to which he simply just said, ooh, I think that's what's turning the frogs gay, which is one of my favorite things. It's one of my favorite things that anybody's ever texted me because I say that all the time. That's an Alex Jones line for those of you not in the know, where he gets exceptionally angry. He's like, they're putting the stuff in the water that's turning the frogs gay. And it's just, to hear that line weaponized against me is just one of the funniest things that has happened to me during this show. And I'm thankful that Ethan is a part of this community, as I am thankful that all of you are part of this community. And I need to do a better job of plugging stuff. So I'm going to try and do it right now. I spoke last Saturday at the 7th Congressional Dems event up in Wausau. There is a video of that currently available on my YouTube page. Don't watch it now, obviously, because I'm live. Don't watch it during Haley's show. Wait for Dave Ramsey to start, then watch. That immediately is going to get me 5 angry emails. Wait for Dave Ramsey to start, and then check out the video. Just type Ben Cominos into your search bar. I have my own channel. I think this might also be going up on the HBY page eventually, but until then, this is kind of the only place that you can check it out. Getting a ton of positive feedback about what was said. And those of you that are regular listeners will be like, wow, it's almost like I'm just listening to a segment of Outside the Box. But what you take for granted is there are still a ton of mole people out there that haven't found this show yet. I'm joking. You're not mole people. I'm sorry. But there's a lot of people out there that haven't found Outside the Box yet. And to them, hearing this kind of stuff for their first time is a bit of a shock to their system. So when I'm sitting there telling a bunch of Democrats, like, don't be talking to me about impeaching Trump. Don't be talking to me about trials for ICE agents. Talk to me about economic shifts that are going to make a difference in society. That's what's going to win you elections going forward. I think it's a pretty powerful speech, and I take questions afterward, live and on the air. My godmother's wife texted me a moment ago to let me know that she's like, I know you do this every day, but it's very impressive that you were able to take those questions like that and do what you were doing with no notes in front of you, which is nice to hear. So if you would like to hear a little bit more of a formal setting version of me where I don't randomly start making movie references, check out my YouTube page. It's quite literally technically the only video I have posted because everything else up there is just live videos of this show that get funneled under the live category. So go check it out. I'd really appreciate it. Then consider subscribing if you haven't already. We just cracked the 200 number this morning and I'm riding high. So every one of those helps as we're kind of trying to get this message out there a little more. I would like to put a bow on this Patrick Meyer conversation. I normally don't talk about one issue this long, but if it keeps generating comments and interaction, I don't have the emotional capacity to stop. So I'm going to continue reading these text messages as they continue, piling in. And these I haven't even taken the time to read because the YouTube chat has been popping off as well, and I've been kind of trying to read all of these. It's so hard to keep all of this straight. We're going to need to work on a producer here at some point. Start messaging the higher ups. Tina says, I have a high school senior in Appleton. I don't like a lot of what was said in these days on both sides. These comments give me a great opportunity to talk to my student about what's okay, what's not, and why. I learn more about my child and gives me a great opportunity to share with her my opinions and why it matters, what we think, and what words we choose. You know what's interesting, Tina? And I hope you're still listening because you sent this message about a half hour ago, so I apologize for taking so long to get to it. But I'm of a very similar attitude. Like very rarely, if I ever received information, which I really don't have a lot of examples of, it's not like I can recall one from my memory banks right now to be like, oh, I remember when this moment happened. If there were ever a time where I were confused about something a teacher had said, or all of a sudden it was a new line of thinking that I maybe wasn't used to getting from a teacher, and I came home and explained it to my parents, they would oftentimes kind of talk me through whatever I was going through. At the end of the day, like I state in terms of literacy or learning to read, teachers are there to give you the nuts and bolts of learning and the tools to learn. But a lot of the learning is going to happen in home life. Like if I would have been dependent on what my teachers taught me for how to read, let me say it this way. I don't remember how my teachers taught me how to read. You know what I remember from when I was 4 years old, sitting there reading Frog and Toad Are Friends with my parents. Spoiler warning, they're more than friends to some of the conservatives in the audience. I remember reading that to my parents. I remember very vividly getting confused by the word mother. And I'm like, how is a TH a sound? And having my mom walk me through it. That's a microcosm of this entire story. A teacher can say something that's off-putting, but fundamentally, and like I think we forget this sometimes, we've all had good teachers, right? I'm not saying no teachers matter, but let's be real. I was a bit of an academic growing up, and I myself would oftentimes tune out a lot of stuff coming from teachers and authority figures. This may come as a shock to you, but I had a bit of an issue with them from time to time. I very rarely had the luxury of acting that way with my parents. And I think that's important to remember here as well. But that's, of course, just my opinion. We have one person here just simply typed in fake president. Fair enough. One person here says someone tried to hurt President Ford by dropping a brick on his car, on his auto, is what it says. Dave from Appleton. That's kind of wild. Like, and again, that's actual violence. That's obviously never acceptable. You should probably lose your job for doing something like that. The words, the tweets is another conversation entirely. Cynthia says a preschool teacher from Ohio named Connie Baum was fired. She said we're gonna have to pay really close attention to what they're actually trying to distract us from. The UAE is leaving OPEC and so many other. Yeah, I feel that. It's a sticky situation, and it sucks because there's a chance this person's life might be irreparably changed. And as the YouTube chat is kind of mentioning here, if there were specific guidelines about what took place and about teachers posting on social media, that's another different story entirely, right? Like if you go on social media, you post a racial slur and there's a specific rule about hate speech in like a contract that you signed, wherever the situation is, that's a different conversation entirely. But to go there, make a joke in bad taste, something that I don't find funny, something that I emphasized yesterday, edgelord humor to me is a crutch for people that aren't funny. It's kind of like the people who claim to be against cancel culture, who like want to use the F slur for gay people and drop N-bombs in their jokes, not because they're racist, but because it goes along with what the joke is. And it's like, okay, so what you're telling me is that you can't elicit a laugh out of the people in your life without saying or doing those kind of things. And to me, that just means that you're not a funny person. And if you think the only way to elicit a reaction from the people in your social feeds is to post something about having assassins with better aim, that says to me you're probably just not a funny person in real life. Is that grounds to be fired? I don't know. Probably not. But it stinks. It stinks for this individual here because the court of public opinion is definitely loud. And as I have stated, the MAGA brigade is infinitely louder than liberals are, because I watched the crap storm fall on that Milwaukee talk show host after he made a similar style joke about Governor Walz being assassinated by Iran. And again, I can't stress enough, that person not only still has their job, but actually had their reach amplified after making those kind of comments. I watched a very obvious concerted effort from liberals to get this guy off the air, an effort to target his sponsors so that the sponsors all pulled their support and the station would have no choice but to do so. It's almost like politics is just a game of people trying to exploit tragedies to push forward whatever their political agenda is. And if a moment like this can happen, so be it. I think it's why you're seeing so much frustration from the Republican rights, that there really might be an opportunity here for Donald Trump to use this moment to push forward something popular within the MAGA agenda that maybe otherwise might not have had any kind of backing. And instead, the entire MAGA movement, in the political sphere, that is trying to use this to get a ballroom across the finish line that quite literally nobody is asking for other than political elites. I came across economic data showing you that compared to other communist countries, North Korea, China, Cuba, Venezuela, America has a higher malnutrition death rate per 100,000 people than any of those countries. We're watching an economy completely collapse in on itself. We're watching people not see access to buying homes, to educating themselves, to taking care of their parents in their elder age, to having someone look over their children while they're trying to work for a pittance in order to afford some of these things. And you're watching the entire MAGA movement, including the social media influencers, try and use the events of Saturday evening to push forward a $400 million ballroom that I think we were told Mexico was going to pay for, but now it's looking more and more like that's going to be coming out of American tax dollars. And it's causing even more frustration with the MAGA movement in general than what they were already dealing with here. I'm just going to be real. I don't know that you could intentionally be acting in a way to alienate the people that voted for you in a more egregious way than the way that Donald Trump and the people in his sphere have been acting for the last 16 months. It genuinely feels like his campaign is actively geared towards turning people away that have supported him so loudly for the last 10 years. And like, I don't know what the strategy is. Just going to be frank, I have no idea what the agenda is here in the way that they are doing these things, but the fact that they are so adamant about this ballroom, while so much of the economic agenda is collapsing around them, while so many people find themselves lumped into a group that can't afford the basic necessities to live, it's a hard thing to deal with, to say the least. We got a call. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Morning, Ben. How you doing? This is Brian.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, I just listening to your comments, and I think I just wanted to highlight the fact that I think both sides are, especially on social media, are trying to be right, are trying to be that their side is winning. And I mean, like you were talking about the ballroom, pushing the ballroom through. I believe with all my heart and soul that if they build the ballroom now, the next administration that comes in, if it's a Democrat, they're going to rip that thing down. I believe that everybody is trying to win, and they're going to crawl over the next person to do it. And it seems kind of sad because right now everybody's against each other, when maybe we should just come together and say, this isn't working, and work on trying to come to some common I don't know, platform, common denominator.
I'm right there with you. The disheartening part about all of it, Brian, is you watched people who identify as MAGA, rightfully so, highlight that Bidenomics was not working, that the forever wars don't work. And now those same individuals are telling you the economy's ripping and roaring again. The Dow hit 50,000. And did you hear Iran was pretty close to nukes? Like, I'm there with you. Like, we need to find a way to coalesce, but the only way to coalesce is with people that are willing to acknowledge. And conversely, liberals pretended like everything was working and are now acting like society is collapsing. And I think it's a matter of finding the rest of us outside of the political elite that kind of recognize that none of the pictures these people are painting are accurate. And the only part where I'll disagree with you is I think liberals will absolutely love using that ballroom after Trump builds it. Be like, well, it's here. They might change the name of it, but cold day in hell, they tear it down. They'll throw parties in there and enjoy it just as much as everyone else, you know?
Yeah, but then they might not be true Democrats. They might be, just the part of the uni party that we've been talking about.
Yeah, you're probably right, man. But yeah, right. I'm pulling for it. Yeah, take it easy. You back in town? Is that what this call's about? Or are you still out and about?
No, I'm driving through a thunderstorm in northern Alabama, and you just touched a nerve, and my wife is looking at me like, quit driving and talking. So I got to go.
All right. Tell her I said hello. Take it easy. All right. The phone lines are absolutely blowing up right now, so we'll keep this rolling. Someone literally is just calling right now. You're on hold. Someone called about 60 seconds ago. You're up. Hello. You're on Outside the Box.
Hey, Ben, this is Tim.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, it's funny. I've been listening to him talk about the protection for the ballroom, and I tend to agree with it that it would offer more protection. But in the same sense, have we done anything for the kids in the schools? I mean,
that's the real kicker.
We have a gunman. Pardon me?
I said, yeah, that's the kick. You're spot on with that. Please continue.
Well, we have a gunman that can get into a hotel, and through a lot of security. Well, geez, we're having them get into schools too. So let's address all the issues and agree that something needs to be done. Something needs to be done. Both sides get together and figure out how we can protect ourselves a little better than what we're doing. That's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add, Tim. I think you're spot on with that assessment. I'll always appreciate when you call. You take it easy, man.
You too.
Yeah, bye. All right, let's keep it rolling. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Hey, Ben, Cynthia from Florida. I love the last caller. And, this has annoyed me. You talked about the security. That's a bunker. That's what it's designed for.
100%, because they can tell the civic unrest is coming, right? Like they know we're ticked off. They know
it. I want people to go watch an old movie, The Road. When they come out of that rascal, they're going to be facing us, whoever lives. But I got to tell you something funny the other day. When you don't have anything good to say, you just keep your mouth shut, which I've done pretty much. But I told you this before. When this happened, I said, please don't be a black person like me.
Yeah, isn't that an awful thing to think? Like we should be thinking, I hope everyone's okay, and instead I'm sitting there like, please don't obviously be a lefty because I know what's coming.
Listen, from our history, Greenwood, one person's accused of something, everybody gets killed.
Exactly. No, you're not wrong, Cynthia. I appreciate you.
We haven't progressed much.
Yeah, we have not. You take it easy. And I will admit, this isn't a joking matter. And I realize we just did an hour and a half about someone losing their job for joking about a potential shooting attempt. Allow me to try my hand at it. I will admit, the further I go into this manifesto, people online are referring to this guy as the blue sky shooter because this person is very obviously a liberal, not a leftist, a liberal, somebody in favor of Ukraine, somebody who is very anti-Trump, but also thinks that anybody on the left who is expressing sympathy for Gaza is secretly a MAGA Trumper. He's quite literally blue MAGA. And when you look at the shootings that have taken place, we don't know anything about Timothy Crooks because for some reason they're keeping that dude on lockdown. We don't know anything about that guy. But we do know that the dude who I'm blanking on his name right now from the golf course was also super pro funding for Ukraine and all of these different factors. And while people like to conflate liberals and the left, and I use every fiber of my being to make sure that that is not a misconception that takes place, I am a leftist. The reason why conservatives like this show is because I also hold liberals to account as well as conservatives, because I think that's where the conversation kind of gets lost. But at least two of the three shooters identify as liberals, blue MAGA libs, and not as leftists here. So if we are going to demonize any population of people, it would be Kamala voters. It would be K-hivers and not anybody on the left. So I think that's an important distinction to make here as we continue this conversation about this individual and his manifesto is made public. Pat in Appleton says if Democrats come in and want to tear down the ballroom, they should instead use it as a food pantry or a soup kitchen. Exactly. There's good ways. There's good ways to use it. I am not instinctively anti-ballroom. I am anti-ballroom because in an administration where you're applying tariffs to increase prices even further than they already have, you're clearly starting another forever war with causes that nobody can adequately identify with no real exit plan in place. covering up for the Epstein files, still continuing to send money to all these different countries that aren't America, in a society where all of those things are happening, and the one thing you want to talk about is the ballroom. That is where my frustration with the ballroom stems from. I couldn't give two craps less about what the ballroom is or how much it costs. $400 million, even if it is tax dollars, whatever. But then don't tell me we don't have the money for AIDS funding in Zimbabwe, but we have the money to do this. Don't tell me we don't have money for cancer research, but we have the money to do this. That's where my frustration stems from. I have not memory hold the fact that we had a Nazi salute in South African take part in our Congress or in our government for the better part of 3 months. He hired a bunch of teenagers and then had them strip all of these different programs away. But then we find $40 billion to send to Argentina. We're going to send $400 million to build this ballroom. You can bet your ass if liberals were trying to build a ballroom, MAGA wouldn't shut up about it for the next 4.5 months. But the fact that Trump's talking about it, now you have this conversation. The conversation isn't about the ballroom. The conversation is about a fledgling economy being ignored by both parties, and they want it to be about the ballroom. I made the joke yesterday. I said there are boomers out there on the Democratic side who think that the assassination attempt on Saturday was a false flag, and it was a false flag to get the ballroom across the finish line. Nobody's thinking about the ballroom. Nobody under 40 is thinking about the ballroom in any way. They're viewing it as yet another expenditure that the government is making that there's no need to make. But and I hate to say this, $400 million really isn't that much in terms of tax dollars. As Luke says on TikTok, yeah, I don't think anyone really cares about the ballroom. Epstein and Iran are the issues. And most importantly, in my opinion, the economy. The affordability crisis is still strangling a large percentage of young people that can't seem to find a way to get a foothold on this society. It's what took Donald Trump into the presidency, was frustration with the Democrats. And I do have an economic segment planned for today. I don't know if we're going to get there or not, but I do have an economic segment planned for today that highlights that Donald Trump's favorability on the economy has completely cratered. But when you look at the situation, the dispersal of income, it has been getting gradually worse at a escalating pace since COVID started. And you know who had control of Congress since COVID? Everybody. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Morning, Ben. Jerry from Appleton.
Hello.
I've decided that to share. It's time for a little bit of a reality check on this White House proposed ballroom and the White House Correspondents' Dinner. If the ballroom already existed, there is no chance that the Correspondents' Dinner would have been there, and I can give you about 5 different reasons for that. First of all, it's sponsored by the White House Correspondents Association, not by Donald Trump, not by the White House, not by the government. And there's a lot of disharmony and antithesis between the White House correspondents and Trump. Second reason is, even if they wanted to have it there, it's way too small. The Washington Hilton Ballroom is much bigger, and it's been at the Washington Hilton Ballroom every year since the 1960s. Trump, without a doubt, would have created constraints that the White House Correspondents Association never would have agreed to, even if it would have been proposed. So the point that some people make that this never would have happened had this ballroom existed, in my opinion, is nonsense.
Well, even to take it even further, as you're talking here, Jerry, we've got a guy who calls himself Old Lib on my YouTube chat here. He says, very hard to secure a golf course. It costs us millions every time Trump goes to golf. Like this idea that this one event, which I've heard through the grapevine, they even turned down extra security at one point. I can't remember the source that I saw that on there, though, but I think all your points are well taken. And I think it's misdirecting a lot of anger and frustration for the situation, and more importantly, the life that everybody's living right now. So I think I really don't have much to add to what you're saying, other than to, as one person says, repeat it louder for the people in the back. I think it's a spot on assessment, so I appreciate the call.
Thank you.
Yeah, take it easy. And as Ange 1970 says, I think you're a new listener here, Ange. I think you'll fit in just great. She says Democrats are right, not left. Exactly. Our elections are between the far-right MAGA voters and the Bush-era Republicans, otherwise known as the Democratic Party. Fun fact, Zohran Mamdani just proposed a new bill, essentially $1 billion tax increase explicitly on hedge funds. Nothing else other than people that run hedge funds. Always remember that Democrats were trying to snuff out that campaign just as much as Republicans were. And with that, we're going to we're done with this conversation. We're moving on to economics. I've been putting in economic mood, but I do have to squeeze a break in. It's going to be a short break here. We'll be back in roughly 3 minutes. Everybody stay right where you are. You're listening to Outside the Box with Ben Cominos here on WHBY. All right. Really quickly, and then I promise I'm moving on. Larry says we need a third party, the WACA party. It's the Working American Class Association party, and I'm right there with you. Patton Appleton says, totally agree. Don't want the ballroom to be built either, but just saying they should be focused on using the money for good things, not the ballroom. But a golden ballroom soup kitchen would be a nice touch for people who can't even afford to live in a cardboard house, right? Just saying. I love it. Like, I mean, again, I couldn't care less. As Laura Lee joins the TikTok chat, welcome to the party. I couldn't care less about whether or not this ballroom gets built, but I think using it for good purposes is a good sign there. Cynthia just simply says, tell Brian that his wife must be one of my long-lost relatives because I say to my husband all the time, no, people should be calling my show while they're driving. You keep one eye on the road and your ears on the station. It's simple multitasking at that point. Leave your husbands alone. DSL says, I'm still trying to figure out how a random Twitter account whose only post for several years ago was the shooter's name was just a head scratcher. All right, I'm going to be real with you, man. I went down a rabbit hole that I probably spent way too much time on. For those of you that don't know what DSL is talking about, in 2023, there is a random Twitter account that has never posted anything in their life. And one time in 2023, they posted one message, and the message was simply the first and last name, Cole, what's his face, Austin, whatever it is. I totally already forgot it, and I don't have it written down in front of me. It just says his name. And here's the only justification. And I'm not saying I'm right, DSL. I'm just trying to work my way out of this rabbit hole. I think the reason that tweet exists is like, have you ever, I've never done it because I'm not a boomer. No, I'm joking, boomers. But like, have you ever like meant to type something into the search bar on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, but you're actually typing it like on your content creation part and you end up posting that person's name when you meant to search that person's name? That's the only logic that I can get behind. It still doesn't explain why that person's name was being searched. There's still a lot of missing holes in that story. But the only thing that I can rationalize is that's how that happened. But it's strange, and it's on my radar. There's a lot I don't want to be. I said it yesterday. A lot of people immediately went to conspiracy territory on this. And the show's called Outside the Box because I have a strange way of thinking about stuff. But like, when the default is for everybody to think strange things, it makes it not as much like you're almost more unique by just like reporting what happened at this point, because nobody actually believes that it was real. Like outside of like, you know, a lot of big time Trumpers, but like there's a lot of people who are looking at this subjectively. And Betsy had a great comment yesterday where it was like, there's no way this was a planned attack. And they put what they put in that manifesto. They would not be referring to Trump as a pedophile and a rapist and all these different things and then have that manifesto be read to him live on the news. And I was like, in reality, that is the best example of evidence to the contrary of this being a fix. And it's hard for me to refute what she was saying there. But I promise you, I'm right there with you, man. All right. And with that, I do want to get into the economy. We're not going to get to the minerals comments, are we? We'll see what happens in the final segment here. But so as it stands right now, when Donald Trump first started this second term, January of 2025, the question, do Americans approve or disapprove of how Trump handles the cost of living? Immediately when the administration started, he was already polling at 40%. But like, that's the Trump derangement syndrome that everybody always likes to talk about with Donald Trump. There was no evidence to make one claim or the other. Everybody was just mad that he was becoming president. That number has gone from disapprove to 40% to disapprove being 69%, a 29% jump over the course of the last 15 months. And Democrats are running this up the flagpole saying, see, this guy sucks. This is why it's important to vote for Democrats. When will you people learn the Republican Party doesn't have the answers? Here's the problem with that explanation. I am currently looking at a chart, and I'm going to do my best to describe this. I have this video up on my socials if you haven't seen it already, though, if you'd like a visual to go along with this when you get off the road. It highlights the wealth, who holds the majority of the wealth in the United States from Q1 2020, when COVID started, until today. And spoiler warning, the smallest that discrepancy is in Q1 of 2020. And even at that point, the 10% wealthiest Americans held about 70% of the total wealth, while the bottom 90% held the remaining 30%. And I would argue that even that is too much of a discrepancy in the way that wealth is distributed. And every quarter since then, it only trends in the worst direction, with the chart ending at Q4 2025 with a massive discrepancy in how much money they are holding, closer to 80% at this point, while 90% of Americans, and for the people bad at math, that's about 315 million Americans sharing the remaining 15% of wealth. So Democrats will hold up the fact that people have given up on Donald Trump and believing that he has any interest in addressing an affordability crisis or a cost of living crisis, when all data highlights that while objectively the last 4 quarters were the worst 4 quarters for wealth dispersion, the previous 4 quarters before that were the worst ones before Trump was in office. So it's not like Joe Biden or the Democrats had us on a path where this was being addressed and Donald Trump took control of the wheel and drove us in a direction that doesn't make any sense. The fact of the matter is, it has been trending this way since COVID started. People talking like me in 2022 were called conspiracy theorists for highlighting that wealth was concentrating more and more into the hands of a select few. And now that there's a Republican office, much to Ange's point, who I accidentally referred to as a she, he's a he. And as Ange highlighted, this is why the Democrats are the center-right party, because there was no agenda to address this as an issue. They are banking on the goldfish memory of the average American voter to forget just how unacceptable the economy was in 2024 because Donald Trump is so uniquely bad at it in 2025. So they'll hold up these metrics about accountability and success at running the economy and say, see, this is why you got to vote for Dems. And while that message may work, because MAGA and the Republican Party is basically dead in the water as it stands right now, I most certainly am not going to pretend that that's the case. Even in an election year, we need to see the duopoly stop this game of slowly allowing us to drift into an economy that is absolutely leaving more. I oftentimes say more than 2/3 of us behind. I think we're very quickly approaching a reality where it's leaving 3/4 of us behind, and it's only going to get worse until we demand better from the people that we elect. It sure as hell isn't going to come from this president, but it doesn't mean we can't find it from somebody else. And with that, I promised you guys a conversation about mineral access mining in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and plenty of other places. I'm going to tell you why I think you're seeing a resurgence in that attitude and why the economic minds in the world might have an element of truth to what they're saying, but we have to have a real conversation about this. This is what politics is supposed to be about. We can at least start the conversation here today. We'll be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to Outside the Box here on WHBY. All right, we're back. Outside the Box, Ben Cominos, WHBY. This show gets a lot harder when you have a bunch of live chats going. I'm just going to say that. I'm not going to stop complaining about it. I realize I've chosen to do this, but I'm just saying. We got one person asking here, Dave in Appleton, are NFL players in the 1% club money-wise? In PA, I hear that homeowners don't own the mineral rights under their land. All right, here's the deal. As far as the NFL players go, they are technically in the 1% salary-wise, but here's the difference. I kind of used this example on Friday with gambling, and it works the same way here. If you're paying your fair share into the system, I do not care about how much money you make. People will oftentimes try to vilify Bernie Sanders. Oh, he owns 3 homes and he has a net worth of $27 million. Nobody has been saying on the left that you're not allowed to be a millionaire. It's that you're not allowed to become a trillionaire while laying off 10% of your workforce and exploiting loopholes that result in your company paying $0 in federal taxes. That's what people have an issue with. So NFL players really can't write off a lot of their stuff. They're millionaires. They're multimillionaires. Some of them have 8-9 figures in their bank accounts. Here's the thing, though. They also are W-2 employees. All the money they make is readily available on this sheet, where that you sends that sheet off to the government. It's like, okay, you signed a contract for $25 million. We're taking 60% of that right now. Your manager gets 10% of it. Your state and local taxes get this percentage of it, and you have this small piece on the other side of it. That's why you hear all these stories about people making millions of dollars and then going broke, because back in the day, there was nobody that was really providing any athletes with financial literacy or explaining to them that a $10 million contract does not mean that you can buy a $10 million house. I don't think it's necessarily apples to apples. We're probably going to have to revisit this conversation about minerals tomorrow, but I'd at least like to set the stage here, at least the debate, some food for thought, and we'll start the show with it tomorrow. I apologize for the misleading promo, but if you know me at this point, I mean, what else is new? Betsy, I see your comment about a GoFundMe for a producer, by the way. I'm right there with you. Here's the deal. If you're a longtime listener of me, you remember when you first met me and I said I am against the funding for the war in Ukraine because I did not believe that the war in Ukraine was about defending democracy or about Ukrainian sovereignty. I believed it was about access to the minerals located in the Donbass region, the region that Russia was interested in taking over and that Ukraine was interested in saving. The reason these minerals have become so popular is because they are the materials necessary to build semiconductor chips that we find in our phones, our cameras, our cars, and so many other different factors in our lives. Most importantly, in the eyes of not many people, but enough wealthy people that it doesn't matter, these are the materials that are going to be necessary to get AI off the ground and data centers off the ground and all of these other different factors that are important to contribute to. If you, like me, don't want the war in Ukraine to happen, American businesses are going to need to find access to these minerals elsewhere. Otherwise, we're not going to have lithium batteries that we've grown kind of dependent on. We're not going to have all of these different types of technology. And as I often state, this is what politics is supposed to be about, is the economic and convenience factor of mining for these minerals offset the environmental impact of completely trashing our national parks and locations. And that is a very real question to ask. I personally, as someone who, yes, I use my phone a lot more now, specifically for occupational purposes, I could find a way to circumvent that, though. At the end of the day, I can just do radio and be happy as a clam, continue doing things the way that I do it. Is it worth completely ruining the only environment we're ever going to have, completely ruining our national landscape in the name of making sure that these companies are able to generate these goods? And if we're not going to allow the mining to take place, is it worth the war and the loss of life that is taking place in places overseas to continue maintaining access? Yes, this is a story that I probably should have brought up with more than 4 minutes left before my show was about to end. But this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the politics of it. One listener of mine gave me a specific example of what's going on in Minnesota near waterbeds, and we will start the show in the 9 o'clock hour with that conversation. Unfortunately, the Kakana story, given the fact that I do local radio, I couldn't avoid that element of the conversation, and that kind of went on for over an hour, so it kind of threw the entire show out of whack here. So we will get to it tomorrow. But for those of you that didn't get to listen to that conversation, download the WHBY app and check out the audio, or you obviously can check me out on YouTube, Facebook, or TikTok. I go live there every day, and on YouTube and Facebook, the audio stays there after the show wraps up if you can't watch live. With that, thank you very much for listening, guys. Haley's up next, and we'll keep this rolling later on. You listen to Outside the Box here on WHBY.